Now, overall, I didn't mind reading this month's episode of Justice Society of America, but only because I kind of liked its fractured narrative, a narrative that in many ways focused on Helena Wayne, aka the Huntress, who time hopped from the 1940s to the present day, all the while introducing us to a number of concepts, characters and ideas during her travels. This includes
Daredevil,
who is a time-travelling villain that initially came into conflict with the JSA during his first appearance in All-Star Comics, issue 35, published July 1947. Now, normally he's the type of villain that generally works on his own, but it has been known that he's also worked with other villains too, such as the Injustice Society, the Time Trust and Project M. Currently though, he seems to be working on his own again, but I suspect he's getting help from someone else.
and who might that be?
Well, it won't come as a big surprise if one of Per Degadon's previous co-hosts is also involved with these time-hopping shenanigans. Someone like Walton, for instance, as he's a long-time adversary of Dr. Fate, and he does have the ability to prevent the good doctor from reading Helena's mind.
So why would he want to do that?
Presumably to prevent Helena from revealing Per Degadon's identity, along with the fact that he's killed Helena's teammates and her mother, the Golden Age Selena Kyle, who, I hasten to add, originally died many years ago and appears to be included in this series for the sake of presenting us with something new or different, just like Justice Society Dark, for instance, or Salem, the Witch Girl, as neither of these two entities existed previously in the DCU, yet for some unknown reason they've shown up here. Now please don't get me wrong, as I'm not trying to say that I did enjoy any of these new additions. If anything, I found them rather intriguing. But in the same breath, I would have preferred a book named Justice Society of America to actually include the Justice Society of America, instead of a cluster of disposable characters that appear to act as stepping stones from one episode to the next. That said, however, I did appreciate the variety of different artists who contributed to this book, namely Mikkel, Jerry and Scott, as they did a pretty decent job of presenting us with some amazing looking visuals, some that were both bold and expressive by design. Let's just hope that next month the story can match the art. In the last episode of 1 Minute War, we saw the Fraction crash land on Earth in order to take over the entire planet. So, in this episode, we see the Flash family come together and eventually, well, in retrospect, I suppose they don't do too much, not really, but they did kind of meet up and introduce themselves to one another, and in doing so, we also discovered that Wallace and Bart don't always see eye to eye. The Fraction has pilfered many planets in the past, and unfortunately, Iris, Wally's aunt, dies from an explosion that rocks the Flash family, especially her love interest, Barry Allen. And who can blame him? No one, I suppose, as he and Linda have been an item since the 1960s, and let's not forget that once upon a time he did marry her and care for her more than anyone else in the world. So now she's dead, what will he do next? Go mad, run away, or do something just as dramatic? In any event, Iris's death has elevated this story, emotionally at least, and I for one would like to see where it's headed next. Another thing about this story I must also mention would have to be the artwork provided by Adam Cruz, because even though it's not as detailed as the regular series artist, Fernando Passerin, Adam's manga-inspired artwork has given this event a joyful edge that I wasn't really expecting. So much so in fact, that I found that it managed to elevate the story's humour but dilute the dangers it ultimately conveyed. Along similar lines, I was also conflicted with the overall flow of the story, as all it did was gather all of the different members of the Flash family under one roof so they can then fight it out with the Fraction next month. Now, with some benefit of hindsight, I'd say I could define this particular episode of Daredevil with just 3 words. Words like gritty, as the artwork throughout this adventure was appropriately gritty in both tone and style, and occasionally helped ground it into some sort of reality. Bold, because it boldly presented us with a series of daring concepts and ideas ranging from convicted criminals policing the police all the way to capitalism being the root of all evil. And finally, weird, as the story was weird, really weird, due to the range of concepts I previously mentioned. Well, let's face it, seeing a group of escaped criminals defending citizens from the police isn't something we generally see every day, is it? And along similar lines, I can say exactly the same thing about capitalism corrupting society. But then again, I don't think this current creative team wanted to make this story a realistic story. If anything, they probably wanted to make it into something new, something different, something idealistic, but at the same time tried to ground it by having one of their characters, which in this case was Bullet, question these ideas by going up to Matt and presenting him with a series of more relatable counterpoints. Well, that's until the end of the book, when he and his son get captured by the Hand. But don't worry folks, because I'm sure next month we will see the fish trying to save them both by doing what they normally do best. But before then, we have this issue, this bipolar issue, which had atmospheric artwork, a nuanced narrative, and a cast of characters that both elevated its premise and brought it down. To be completely honest with you, I had a tough time trying to figure out which comic book should come at the top of my list out of this month's episode of The World's Finest and this month's episode of Batman. And to be fair, the only real reason The World's Finest wasn't first, and I do mean the only reason, is because I kind of knew how it was going to end before I picked it up. You see, at the end of last month's episode, we saw David being stopped from killing the Joker not so long after the Harlequin of Hate kidnapped him and iron tortured him half to death. So, in an effort to dilute his rage, we now see Superman taking David to the Fortress of Solitude in order to strip him of all his powers. But before he was able to do that, the Key and a group of his henchmen suddenly turn up and fight the heroes until, well, to cut a long story short, until the heroes finally turn the tide of battle and save the day. However, in the aftermath of their victory, Superman and Co suddenly realise that the Key has activated the spaceship that originally brought David to Earth, and this results in David being transported from Earth Zero to another planet, one where he comes face to face with his next new mentor,
Gog,
otherwise known as that massive git who once fought the JSA and inadvertently gave birth to the Kingdom Come saga. So, as I said at the start of my review, the only real reason why I downgraded this comic book is because I kind of knew where it was headed beforehand, but what I didn't know was how much I was gonna love reading it, as I loved the art, the story and the characters involved, because each of these elements were filled with a healthy dose of charm and personality that I for one just truly loved. At the top of my list is this month's episode of Batman, an episode, I hasten to add, that stood out from the crowd due to its innovative take on a tried and tested narrative. You see, when the episode begins, we discover that Bruce Wayne is still alive and is now living on an alternate Earth somewhere in the multiverse, an Earth without a Batman but with a couple of familiar faces, including the Mob Boss, Selina Kyle, the Skeletal Ghost, Jim Gordon, and the Venom-powered Judge, Jury and Executioner, Harvey Dent. But more importantly, we're also introduced to two new characters who act as counterpoints to Bruce's current adventure. One of them is a humble street urchin who saves Bruce from Harvey before tending to his injuries, whereas the second one is a mysterious mastermind who wants to get his hands on Bruce, although as of yet we don't truly know why.
to be continued.
Now, overall, I really enjoyed reading this episode because even though I wasn't too keen on reading yet another adventure where Bruce finds himself stranded on an unfamiliar world and trying to make his way back home again following his apparent death, just like what happened to him in the 2010 miniseries The Return of Bruce Wayne, it did present us with a number of innovative scenarios that genuinely piqued my interest. Particularly this new mysterious mastermind character, who I suspect is either Azrael or the Red Hood. as well as this alternate version of Jim Gordon, who I think is an amalgamation of Jim and the supernatural character Deadman. I also like the artwork depicted in this book, as it was bold, earthy and appropriately atmospheric, along with the Tim Drake backup feature, although in this case I liked it due to its more realistic depiction of Robin, who at the moment is trying to cope with the loss of his mentor. So all in all, lovely stuff.